How do you define success within your organization? Full houses. So if you're, let me just take this one quickly. So if you set yourself up to produce new avant-garde plays and can't sell the house and bring in Lion King and sell 23 full houses on the first day, is that success? I'm sorry, I didn't see who said that, but sometimes full houses can mean that we have done something right, but not necessarily. Keep to your mission and keep a full house. What else? Meeting revenue goals. Okay? If we take a grant that asks us to do something that we have not done before, and it is something that is driven by the funder, they have an interest for us to work in a certain community, and we take the grant, and the first year we do very well because the grant pays for the activity, and we hire a part-time person to help us execute in that community. And the next year the grant goes away and we have to find a way to pay for that person, or there's no more support to pay for that activity in that community. Is that success? It gets a little tricky to say. I'm not saying a balanced budget is not a measure of a healthy organization. It absolutely is. But we can balance our budget for and with the wrong means sometimes. What else? How else do we measure success in our organizations? Community support. The community is saying, we need and value what you do. I like that. As long as what we are doing is what we said we wanted to do. Yep. Continuing to develop an audience, continuing to develop a family, bringing people in, growing over time. If we want to grow over time, some of us are very content staying relatively small, serving these people in this community. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Yep. Happy board, happy staff. That's important. We like to answer this question, and you got very close, Denise, with a very simple answer. We like to try to keep things as simple as possible in this chaotic industry. We like to say at the end of the week or at the end of the month or at the end of the year, the only way that we can define success is if we have fulfilled our mission, which for us is a very serious statement. Michael spoke yesterday about the difference between for-profit and non-for-profit companies. For-profit companies know what they stand for. They stand for returning value to shareholders. Non-for-profit companies have a harder time saying what they are for or what defines success. We talked a lot yesterday about how boards and staffs go in different directions at times with ideas about the way in which an organization should be heading. And this often comes back to the reality that we have not taken time recently to go back to what we said we wanted to do and clarify together that, in fact, this still is what we want to do. Or we never, from the beginning, established clearly what it was that we stand for. We go into organizations all around the country, all around the world. We do strategic planning processes with symphonies and zoos and cultural centers and boys and girls clubs. And we spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours at the beginning of that process going through this first, most fundamental element of strategic planning, which is to refine and accept and universalize our mission within our organization. I'm going to give you some barometers to be thinking about whether or not your mission is serving you as a board and as a staff as an effective management tool. We want our missions to be our masters. We want to be slaves to our mission. Our lives are so complicated as arts managers and as boards. And there are so many opportunities that come in our direction. And there are so many funders who are trying to pull us in this direction because they want us to serve this community over here. And how can you not pay attention to this community over here or these kids? We know you don't have an education program now, but wouldn't you be interested in developing something for these children if we gave you this $50 or $60 or $75,000 grant? And we're so interested in that and allured by that because that $75,000 grant allows our budget to expand for that year. But without this anchor, we can very quickly get off course. In our missions, we're looking for three things. I alluded to this yesterday. And I challenge you to go home and at the next meeting between your board and your staff, or the next big idea meeting between your board and staff, just to go through these three basic areas together. And I can almost guarantee you that you will be shocked, jaw-dropping to the floor shocked at how much discontinuity or disagreement there is about these three basic barometers. Who are we serving? Who are we serving? Are we serving young people? Are we serving old people? Are we serving people with disability? Are we serving people in this community? Are we serving people in this community? Are we serving a culturally specific community or not serving a culturally specific community? Are we serving students? Are we serving adults? Are we serving everybody? More often than not, this question is at the heart of bad decisions being made in taking on an opportunity that actually leads us in a direction that at the end of that opportunity, we feel like we have gone astray. Be careful about this one. Now, for theaters, for museums, this is going to be a big group of people. For educational institutions, this is going to be a smaller group of people. Increasingly, we're being asked by funders to use our art to serve a means other than the art itself. Some of you, I'm sure, are encountering this. Make sure you have an answer to this question so that when that opportunity comes up, you are able to not waste a single moment in deciding whether or not your organization is the organization to take on that opportunity, or whether that's going to lead you in a direction that at the end of the week or at the end of the month or at the end of the year, you feel that you have expended capacity and it hasn't made you feel more successful. You've done it basically to serve somebody else's interest. The second area that we look at is what are we doing to serve these people? Who are we serving? What are we doing to serve them? How many organizations in this room have an educational program? How many organizations in this room do not have an educational program? I'm not trying to embarrass anybody, okay? It's very brave not to have an education program these days. Because so many funders want to fund our art to do things other than the art itself. And some of you are set up explicitly to be educational institutions, and that's wonderful. But knowing what at the end of the day or at the end of the week or at the end of the year we must do in order to be successful, and being very clear on this so that our board members are coming into the room with our executive directors, coming to the board table and bringing suggestions about what to do as an organization that are actually implementable, that are actionable, that are not causing the executive director in the back of their head to say, oh my God, my board just doesn't get it. How many times have I said we're not going to do African traditional dance? It's not what we do. And they won't give up on African traditional dance. Sure, I know a funder is willing to pay for African traditional dance, but we're a Nordic dance company. What do we have to do with African dance? This comes up all the time. The last big piece we want you to be thinking about is where. where we need to be fulfilling our mission in order to feel successful. Guys, at the end of the year, this is about doing what we say we want to do. A clear mission that we are able to use to define and rein in our instincts, to limit our activity, and to put out into the funding community, to put out into the newspapers, to put out into our board members' hands and heads when they are trying to go out and recruit new board members. This is about being happy people. This is about, at the end of the year, being able to say, yeah, we did it. Or no, we didn't do it. This is the only way that we have been able to figure out how to keep arts organizations happy and on track. And this is the beginning of disagreement. This is the beginning of discontinuity. This is the beginning of wasting precious capacity by going in directions that at the end of the day don't reflect who we said we wanted to be. Does that make sense? Please, I challenge you at your next board meeting, just set up these 3 buckets. Ask everybody in the room to say who we're serving, what we're doing to serve them, and where we're serving them. I promise you, you will have a 3-hour conversation at least. If not a 3-day or a 3-week conversation. Let me show you how we organize our mission at the Institute. Our mission is actually a grid. Our mission is on one of those pages, I'm sure it's in there. The mission of the DeVos Institute of Arts Management at the Kennedy Center is to leverage the Kennedy Center network to train, support, and empower arts managers and their boards locally, nationally, and internationally. It is the most unsexy mission conceivable. There are no adjectives, there are no purpley words, there are no superlatives, there is no world class, there is no best, there is no recognized as. This mission is my master. Every single day, Michael or I or my team receives an invitation or an overture or an idea or a complaint or a request to go here or do this or serve this community or serve graduate students. If we do not have this tool functioning as a master that is a thumb at the back of our neck saying, do what you said you wanted to do. Don't be pulled in this direction by the Boeing company. Don't just chase that money because the Ford Foundation says it's available. Don't start a graduate program with that university in Europe just because it's alluring and you'd like to spend more time in Paris during the summer. Pay attention to what you said you wanted to do. You serve working arts managers and their boards. You do not serve undergraduate students. You do not serve graduate students. You do not serve foundations. You do not serve city governments. You do not serve federal governments. Being unclear about this is the beginning of going nuts, because when people come to you with something alluring that can balance your budget, that can pay for that extra staff member, but takes you in a direction that isn't what you said you wanted to do, you can do that ad infinitum and end up with an organization that stands for nothing. This is my Bible. At the end of every week, at the end of every month, at the end of every year, can you all see this? I'm sorry, we chose not to use the camera, but if you can you see that? You can see this basically back there, yeah? Locally, nationally, internationally, train, support, empower. This grid is in my head. Every single opportunity that comes across our plate, if it doesn't fall into one of these quadrants, it's out. The utility of a clear mission is that I can make a decision immediately. And I can also see where we are falling short very quickly. Right here, today, now, in this moment, we are fulfilling this part of our mission. Training arts managers and their boards on a national scale. Okay? The work that I'm doing in Oman and the work that we're doing with arts managers from 40 countries every summer at the Kennedy Center and bringing them there to train them for a month at a time, we are most certainly fulfilling our mission internationally, to train arts managers and their boards internationally. Michael also goes abroad, and I go abroad, working with people in groups like this. Support for us means once people have gone through one of our training programs, we're there for them if they need us, and we're also able to provide in-depth support for organizations that are going through crisis or through a transition. I feel very comfortable that we're doing this locally, nationally, and internationally. Empowerment for me means making the people who are part of our family famous and also empowering the idea of arts management as a profession within the public consciousness so that it's not so hard for all of you and for all of us to go out and say, yeah, this actually is a full-time job. Did Michael tell you this? That he actually has people asking him what he does for his real job still. People still don't really understand how hard we work, right? I think we're doing a good job of this nationally. I think we're doing a good job of this internationally. These two boxes keep me up at night. We're not doing a great job of training people in Washington, D.C. We're not doing a great job of empowering people in Washington, D.C. We were a year ago or 2 years ago, but we've had lots of opportunity nationally and internationally that has drawn us away from this. These two areas are the areas where I'm building programs a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now in my artistic plan. I'm constantly looking at this and I'm saying, what areas did I say I needed to be successful in order to sleep at night? What am I doing well? What am I not doing well? Does that make sense? I'm not saying this is the way that everybody needs to organize their mission, but for me, this is my master. And if someone comes to me with an opportunity to build a training program for high school students in Montevideo, might be interesting, wouldn't mind spending time there, but it's not what we do. We don't train high school students. We train arts managers and their boards. For us, that means working arts managers and their boards, okay? 4 characteristics of this mission. We need it to be clear. This just means we want a second grader to be able to read it and understand it. No jargon, no purple prose. Take out any adjectives that you can. If you don't absolutely have to say world class, take it out. If you don't absolutely have to say to be recognized as the leader locally or to be recognized as the leader nationally, take it out. This mission statement is a management tool. Take all of those words and put it in your marketing material. Make this statement as unsexy, muscular, stripped down, pithy, potent as possible. Make it clear so that your funders can read it and say, yes, they are working in that community. I want to fund something in that community. Make this mission statement also a fundraising tool. Make it a marketing tool that communicates very clearly to your internal and your external family what it is that you're doing, where you are doing it, and who you are serving, so that there's no confusion. We want it to be comprehensive. We want it to include everything that we feel we need to do every year in order to be successful, and not one thing more. At the beginning of a strategic planning process, what we are doing is we are going through and essentially making a list of who, what, and where, and then we are fighting tooth and nail with each other over what needs to be in this statement in order to be successful. And there are going to be some people who say it's not enough to just be active and successful in Little Rock. We need to be active and successful in the region, or we need to be active and successful nationally, or we need to be active and successful internationally. We have to fight over that. And for us, it's better to have at the end of the process one board member or one staff member who can't sleep with it and can't live with it and has to leave the organization than to end up with a management tool that isn't helping us manage our activity because there's still lack of consensus about those 3 core things. We need our statements to say everything we need to do in order to be successful, and not one thing more. We need it to be concise. I want all of my board members and all of my staff members to be able to recite this mission as if it had been drilled into them since they were 7 years old. Literally, I want them to be able to say the words. That's why I keep my mission so simple, so unspectacular, so unfancy. Lastly, we need our missions to be coherent. For us, this means they just need to make sense. If we're saying we want to be the world leader in providing arts education to every child, we love these words, every child. I've been working with an arts education institution in Manhattan that had the word in Manhattan and beyond in their mission statement. It drove me nuts. It made no sense. There was no way that this organization could serve children in Manhattan and beyond. So every time an opportunity came up in Kansas City, yes, this was part of my mission. It didn't make sense. Our missions have to make sense. Does that make sense? Clear, comprehensive, concise, coherent. Who, what, where. Clear, comprehensive, concise, coherent. If your statement is not roughly these things, I guarantee you, you will waste precious capacity fighting over which opportunities to take, or when the money gets tough, where to cut. And at the end of the year, if you're not in the black, I can guarantee you, staff members in this room, that your board members will come to you and say, we have not been successful. There is something not right here. I want everyone in the organization to be able to say, yes, we need to balance our books. Yes, we need to be careful with our finances. No, it's not okay to continually run deficits. Yes, we need to figure out how to raise more money if we truly do not have an expense side problem. How many people here have an expense side problem? How many people here are spending too much money? You are? You're spending too much money? Okay. I'd love to look at your budget. Arts managers and their boards are some of the most miserly, stingy, ruthlessly effective, penny pinching until the buffalo poops. What's that phrase? Penny pinching people on the planet. 99.9% of arts organizations that are in a financial crisis are not in an expense side crisis. They're in a revenue side crisis. They're not raising enough money. They're not making enough money. It's not that the staff members are out with their GSA cards. You all saw this story last night. Spending money on week-long boondoggles in Las Vegas. That's not happening in our organizations. So at the end of the year, this is what we want to be our barometer. Or else I guarantee you the fights will continue to be about money. I'm not saying money isn't important, it is. But that's a different subject than whether or not we're doing what we said we wanted to do. Does that make sense? For us, the process starts with mission. We spend a lot of time on this. From our mission, what we do is we go out and we look at the environment around our organization. We perform what we call an environmental analysis, which simply says for organizations, whether they are here in Little Rock or here in Arkansas or here in the South or here in the United States or here in this world, if our mission is to serve people internationally, that are trying to attract the same type of buyer, or literally the same buyer. And for us, a buyer can be a ticket buyer. They can be someone who's coming to our museum. They can be someone who's purchasing our classes, sending their children to our classes. Other organizations that are trying to attract literally the same buyer, or the same type of buyer if they are outside of our geographic location, what are they doing in order to be successful? We are looking at our mission, and we are asking for organizations that have a similar mission area, that are trying to serve similar people with similar things in similar places or types of places. What is required in order for organizations like that to be successful? Where's our symphonies? The symphony here today? Great. Let's start with symphonies. At the beginning of this process, I am throwing up on the wall 20, 30, 40 hypotheses about what I have an inkling is required in order to be successful in the symphony business. Okay? I'm doing this because I've spent my life studying symphonies. I'm doing this because I read Musical America every day. I'm doing this because I read the local newspaper and the national newspaper. I'm doing this because I'm reading Arts Journal as much as possible. I'm keeping up with what is going on in the symphony world. And I'm constantly reading about Michael Tilson Thomas. I am so sick of reading about Michael Tilson Thomas and what he's doing in San Francisco and what he's doing with the New World Symphony and the new Frank Gehry building and how they all have these fancy videos on the wall while people are playing music, and how he has all of the most talented young people coming up, and he's got a feeder system for San Francisco. I'm sick of hearing about Michael Tilson Thomas, but Michael Tilson Thomas is an institutional marketing monster. You all familiar with Michael Tilson Thomas, the principal at San Francisco, and also started New World Symphony in Miami? And I'm paying attention to organizations like mine. I'm paying attention to what other people are doing to get notice, to make money, to perform the best art, to attract the best students, to bring people into their classrooms, to bring people into their performances. I'm looking to the environment. I'm saying, what is required for organizations like mine that are trying to attract a similar type of person in a similar way, in a similar type of area? And it doesn't have to be only organizations here in Little Rock or in Hot Springs. It can be organizations in similar types of communities, right? I might not study an organization in New York City if I were trying to perform an environmental analysis for an organization in Little Rock. I might, because what I'm trying to do in the environmental analysis, I'm really trying to steal as much as possible as I can from other organizations that are doing things well. This process is about enlightened stealing, right? What did Stravinsky say? The difference between a mediocre artist and a great artist is an artist that knows how to steal and steal well, right? That's what we're doing here. We're stealing. In an environmental analysis, I'm looking for 3 types of success factors, we call them. We're looking to build a catalog of success factors. Between 7 and 12 is what we usually end up with in our analyses. We don't want 40 because we're going to build strategies on the back of these environmental analyses. These success factors, and none of us has enough time to build 40 strategies. We need about 10 or 12 strategies to really move our organization forward in the next 3 to 5 years. Excuse me. We have what we think of as our universal success factors. Every single organization in this room has to pay attention to the big 4. Art, marketing, family. How are people building their audiences? How are people building their boards? How are people building their communities around their organization? And lastly, money. How much are other symphonies of our size bringing in contributed revenue as opposed to earned revenue? And symphonies are the luckiest, most well-studied organizations in this room because they have a League of American Orchestras that does a field report every 2 years and studies hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of symphonies and builds this very nice, tidy spreadsheet that tells you exactly which of your competitors or tells you exactly how much your competitors are raising as opposed to earning. Not all of us have that in this room. How many theaters do we have here? Theater Communications Group does a field study every year. You're familiar with that? We use these tools relentlessly. We study other people's 990s. Is everybody familiar with GuideStar? GuideStar.org. GuideStar.org, a free service. You go on, you create an account, and you can go and poke your nose into everybody else's business in this room. You can find out how much everybody's being paid and how much other boards are giving. GuideStar.org. Universal factors. Everybody in this room is paying attention to great art, and great art and how that's defined is going to be defined very differently in different fields. It's going to be defined very differently depending on what our mission area is. If we are a youth orchestra, Great art for a youth orchestra is very different than for a professional orchestra, has different aims, trying to do different things. The second type of factor that we are looking for is industry-specific factors. This means that for an orchestra, we are absolutely studying how we are using our music director as a charismatic, fundraising, marketing, public figure. We are absolutely studying Michael Tilson Thomas and Gustavo Dudamel and David Robinson in St. Louis. How their organizations are positioning them inside the community, what they're asking those conductors and music directors to do as fundraisers. Does that make sense? Industry specific, right? Do we have a performing arts high school here, performing arts class, anyone arts education teaching kids? Yeah, okay. So I'm definitely looking at who is taking home the awards in the national parenting magazines for the best classes. I'm looking at, in my community, which schools have the best connections with institutions of higher learning for those of us who are in secondary school. Because parents are going to send their students to high school level conservatories that have the best connections with the best university systems. And some of those professors are actually teaching in the high school level because I want my kid to get into that conservatory. Does that make sense? These are industry-specific factors. For our theaters, this is if our mission is to produce new plays, who else of a similar type of organization is producing new plays? What kind of playwrights are they bringing in? I'm picking up the phone and calling those executive directors and asking how they're structuring those deals. People are surprisingly open with airing their laundry if you call them in goodwill as a colleague. We call people all the time. We call competitors of our clients all the time and say, how do you do this? When we did a strategic plan for Performing Arts High School in Upper Manhattan, we had on our planning committee executives from 2 non-competitive peer organizations, executives from 2 other very similar type schools in Hartford, Connecticut, and Philadelphia. They were on the planning committee. And what we did with them is we asked them to look at the budget. And they came in and they said, I cannot believe how much money you are paying your teachers. It's unbelievable how much money you're paying your teachers. Your teachers are some of the best paid teachers in the world. What are you thinking? At the same time, your teacher-to-student ratio is very low. Or it's poor. We have many fewer students in our classroom than you do. And our parents value that proximity. Think about that. So those are industry-specific factors that I'm looking for. Does that make sense? And then the last type of factor is what we call organization-specific. And this is, if in my mission, I am a symphony in the South, in a rapidly changing urban environment, where the League of American Orchestras and the NEA has recently commissioned an arts participation report. I'm sure many of you have seen this. We are constantly scanning the field for these field-wide studies that are telling us about trends. Our environmental analysis is not only studying what's going on now, but what smart people think is going to be happening 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now. Because we need to develop strategies to be able to adapt to that change. And environmental analysis is not only about what's going on now, but what will be coming, right? If I'm a symphony or an art school or a theater or a museum in a community where it's anticipated that the Latino community is going to increase by 18% over the course of the next 10 years, I am paying attention to that. That is not an industry-wide factor. That's an organization-specific factor. Does that make sense? Because of where I am, right? I said that at the beginning of this process, we're throwing up on the wall 20, 30, 40 hypotheses, instincts that we have. And then we are going out and we are looking at other organizations that are in our mission area, and we are saying, were we right or were we wrong? And we're constantly chiseling away at that list. That instinct we had because someone brought it up at a board meeting 4 months ago, and we all kind of shook our heads and thought, that's interesting, but actually it's not borne out. And our environmental analysis is narrowing and refining this, because from our environmental analysis, we're learning that some of our regional competitors are doing things very well. Very, very well. And we may ultimately feel that we can't compete with that, or that it's not that important to compete with that. In our environmental analysis, we're tucking away ideas for our strategies, which is coming up in 2 stages from now. We're looking here and we're saying, oh my, that youth program that they just started, where they're offering tickets for kids for $10 to come to the symphony, and they had 473 kids sign up in the first 3 months. And then they got that grant. I'm thinking about ways in which the environment is changing. And it's saying to me, boy, Boeing is no longer funding art, but Boeing is funding education. I'm not chasing the money, but I am asking myself, is the environment changing in a way that I need to go back and reflect on whether or not what I said I wanted to do needs to pay attention to the way in which the needs in my community are changing? Our mission can change. This is sacred for the moment. It doesn't have to be sacred for our lifetimes. Our missions can change if there is a dramatic change in the environment. The Metropolitan Opera, 6 years ago, every single one of you knows this, dramatically changed their mission area with the HD broadcasts. Dramatically. At first, it looked like a bad gamble. They were losing lots of money. Now it looks like a fairly good gamble. They're starting to make money. It's an institutional marketing coup. Their ticket sales at the Met are dropping off. You're probably all familiar with all of this. But Peter Gelb looked at the environment and said, the environment is changing. Arts participation is decreasing. It's likely that fewer and fewer people will be able to afford to come to the Met or be interested in coming to the Met. And we have to deal with this. I have to expand my audience. The environment is changing. I don't know if they formally changed their mission, but it looks like they formally changed their mission. Does that make sense? He was scanning the environment for change. At the end of this process, I want 7 to 12 really potent, stinky, gritty factors. I want factors that are saying, this is what is going on in my mission area. This is what is required in order to be successful. In the internal analysis, I am simply asking myself, do we have it or do we not? How do we stack up against what the environment is telling me is required in order to be successful? My mission tells me what my mission area is. I'm studying organizations inside that mission area to determine what is required in order to be successful within that environment. I am relentlessly stealing other people's ideas. I'm adapting them I'm beginning to adapt them in the back of my head for my purpose. But I am definitely looking at the symphony industry, and I'm seeing that arts organizations that are raising a lot of money and are expanding their audiences have a strong, charismatic, visionary music director at the helm who is defined by their marketing departments by how their hair waves when they're up on the... Every single picture you see of Gustavo Dudamel has this crazy hair. It's real, right? Same thing with Michael Tilson Thomas. He has less hair, but he's got nice hair. David Robinson has a very short cropped hair, but he's this kind of erudite, very well composed, charismatic figure. This is a success factor for symphonies. Then I've got to look at my organization and say, is my music director a fun, enjoyable, nice person to be around? Can I talk about his hair or his dog or his family, right? How am I using my music director as a fundraising marketing vehicle? Is my music director willing to go to meetings with my board? Is my music director a good fundraiser? And the answer to those questions may be no. And we may still want to keep our music director. But we have to figure out a strategy to deal with the difference between what the environment is telling us is required to be successful and what we have. Does that make sense? An internal analysis is saying, realistically, candidly, really soul-searching, really kvetching, really angsting, do we have what is required in order to be successful or not? And the answer to that question goes into the development of 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, not many more than that, really meaty strategies to address the gap between what exists in the environment and what we have in-house. Now, you may look at the environment and realize that, hey, we're actually doing pretty well. In fact, we've got something going on that in our environment, locally, regionally, wherever our mission area is pretty special. We've been working with an orchestra in Texas, one of the big orchestras in Texas. And this orchestra in Texas has the only composer in residence program in Texas. They're the only orchestra that brings composers on a regular basis and gives them a place to live and integrates them with the community and takes them out and teaches kids and commissions new work and puts that work on stage and has master classes and public lectures and dialogues with these composers. It's a competitive advantage for them. They were underutilizing that as a competitive advantage, especially now when the creation of new work feels very risky and bold. They were spending a lot of money bringing these composers in. They were making very little notice of it publicly. They weren't raising much money off of it. They were just doing it because it was mission-driven, is what they believed in. But when they were studying the environment, and then they looked at themselves and they said, wow, we're really special. This is very different for our environment. They built a strategy to leverage the heck out of that advantage. They built an institutional marketing strategy to say, we are the leader in new music development in, I haven't seen how they're actually going to use it, in Texas, in the region, in the South. Watch out, Symphony. They found something that was special, genuinely special. Does that make sense? So it's not only about where are we weak, it's also about what do we have that other organizations in the environment don't have? Or what is this thing, this latent talent, this kind of undermanaged, underutilized, undermaximized talent or asset? How can we really leverage that to raise more money, to increase our visibility, to increase our status? Make sense? The DNA of a strategy everybody has different ways of building strategies. There are many different ways of doing it well. There are many different ways of doing strategic planning. This is just one completely non-sexy, totally logical, fairly straightforward way of doing it, which we like. 3 components. The strategy itself, okay, maximize visibility of composer in residence program. They figured out they had a competitive advantage. Objective. They want to bring in, I can't remember exactly what they're going to bring in X number of composers in residence each year. The second objective, communicate how special this is to the funders. The third objective is put together a press strategy in order to achieve as much visibility as possible. And then under each of the objectives is what we think of as tactics. And this is literally how it gets done. How many of us have a strategic plan in the room right now that's active? I challenge you to go back through that strategic plan and look for any moments in the plan where it says, create a plan to do this. Most of our strategic plans are plans for planning. They're not really plans. We skip this step. We say, we want to raise more money. And the plan is to create a fundraising plan. That's not a strategic plan. That's a plan to plan. These are the three pieces, basic anatomy of a strategy. What we want to try to achieve, then there are subsets of that, how we're going to achieve it. And then the tactics are literally what we are going to do. If we want to strengthen our board, the strategy is not to strengthen our board. Okay? Or the strategy may be to strengthen our board. We need objectives, right? We're going to set up a development committee. We're going to set up a nominations committee. And then the nominations committee is going to meet 3 times every year or 4 times every year. The nominations committee is going to be charged to identify 4 new candidates every quarter. The chair of the nominations committee is going to be required to delegate to other members of the nominations committee to go have lunch or whatever it is, right? This is not a plan for planning. This is a plan. Don't relax once you get to, oh yes, we need to raise more money. We're going to raise more money. We're going to make a plan for it. This is where that plan gets written out. This is our only chance to solve this gap. And this is where we are relentlessly stealing from our peers. We are even for an orchestra in Texas, you bet I'm stealing from Michael Tilson Thomas, even though San Francisco is a diametrically different type of environment, socially, politically, etc., than North Texas. You bet I'm stealing from the New York Philharmonic. You bet I'm stealing from Gustavo Dudamel. You bet I'm stealing from David Robinson. Does that make sense? And the more research we do here in the environmental analysis is not some flimsy, weak, 2-page analysis. This is real work. This is the hardest part of the strategic planning process. We use our fellows at the Kennedy Center. We have 10 year-round fellows that come and study at the Kennedy Center with us in arts management every year. I teach them how to do environmental analysis. They end up working with us on our strategic plans. It takes a lot of time to do this. Unless you have a truly passionate board member, do not give this to a staff member. Staff members, this will take 80 hours, okay? Go out and try to find a very smart graduate student in management or in the business school. Sure, there's lots and lots of graduate students in Little Rock that would be very interested to perform an environmental analysis for a symphony or for an arts education center or for a museum. Try to outsource this piece. This is fun. You can do a lot of this off the top of your head, but this does require going and looking at other people's 990s. It does require reading the press every single day and the press back 6 months. It does require reading all of the field surveys in your area, in your industry. Okay? And the depth of this informs the richness of your strategy. Does that make sense? Yep. Question? Yeah. 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 We use 3 groups of people. This is technical. We use what we call a leadership team, which is 2 or 3 core people who are our primary counterpoints. And if you don't have a consultant in the mix, that's absolutely fine. 3 people who have to drive it forward. They have to schedule the meetings. They have to keep the work on track. They have to make sure that everybody knows what's going on. Those core people are responsible for putting together 2 committees. One is what we call a primary planning committee. It's usually board and staff. It might be a founder who is no longer involved with the organization but has a clear interest. It's not funders. It's not non-competitive peers. It's the family. It's the core group of people who are going to be responsible for developing the strategy. Then there's a third group of people that we call, very simply, an advisory committee. And this is kind of a community brain trust. This is where we're bringing in those non-competitive peers from the school in Hartford and the school in Philadelphia to advise the school in Harlem about how much money they're spending in different areas and how they're right in some ways and off in some ways. 3 groups of people: the leadership team, the primary planning committee, the advisory committee. Your point is absolutely on point. Because at the end of this process, we need a document that will actually be useful to us, and it won't be useful to us if there is a key constituency whose voice did not feel represented throughout the process. So if I'm a symphony orchestra, you bet I have 2 or 3 musicians on the primary committee. If I'm an art school, you bet I have 2 or 3 teachers on the primary planning committee, and I have 2 or 3 parents on the primary planning committee. I do not have funders on that primary planning committee because I don't want the strategic vision of my organization directed by money. This is an opportunity to dream big, to think big, to dream and think realistically, but to dream big and think big. In the advisory committee, think of that as a brain trust, okay? I'm calling in the director of the Downtown Business Development Committee. If part of my gig is to bring people downtown and to create vibrancy downtown, and that's part of my shtick. We're working with an organization who is a recent Art Place recipient. You're all familiar with the Art Place? If you're not, Art Place is a national conglomerate of banks and funders and government that is putting a lot of money into revitalizing oftentimes post-industrial downtown areas to make them more livable. And they're giving away grants to arts organizations that are helping facilitate that regeneration or revitalization of urban space. And on our advisory committee are directors of other Art Place recipients in non-competitive environments, but people who are trying to develop strategies to go after similar types of money on the national framework, or in the national funding framework. On that advisory committee is the kind of downtown business development director. On that committee are members of the city council. On that committee is the mayor of that city. Does that make sense? Right? So there's people who we know we need their voice to be represented in this document in order for them to get their constituency to follow the strategy once the strategy is out there. They're on our primary committee. Those are our parents, our musicians for our symphonies. Those are our curators for our museum. Definitely board members, definitely key staff members. Does that make sense? A founder, if the founder has left the organization, but is still, if the strategy moves in a different direction, will come in and burn the place down if he doesn't agree with it or she doesn't agree with it. Those 3 groups of people. Is that helpful? Does that make sense? Okay. All right, we're in the home stretch here. I've got you for 5 more minutes. Strategies are just wishes unless there's an implementation plan. Our implementation plan says who is going to do what and when. We put it in an Excel spreadsheet. We break out the strategy, the objectives, and the tactics, and we add 2 columns, who and when. That becomes how we organize our board meetings moving forward. That becomes the tool that the executive director uses to keep the staff on track. That becomes the tool that our strategic planning committee revisits every 3 months or 6 months or 9 months or 12 months when we come back together and say, how are we doing? And for a manager, the reason why we like to put it in an Excel spreadsheet, because the manager can sort it by name, they can sort it by date. A board chair can sort it by name or sort it by date. If there's a nominations committee or a development committee or a fundraising committee, they can sort their tasks by name and by date. Completely not sexy, totally non-21st century, very practical, very useful. And the last part of our process, I'm sorry for those of you in the back who can't see this down here at the bottom, that's an F for financial plan, not for failure. F for financial plan. Our financial plan is not a 47-page, every single class item document. It is basically a pro forma extending out the length of my plan. If it's a 5-year plan, it represents the ramifications of my strategies in financial terms. So if what I'm saying is, I need my board to increase its give-get and increase its fundraising capacity by X amount each year in order to achieve this programmatic activity that we have all agreed is absolutely imperative that we must do in order to be successful, then my financial plan is going to tell me exactly how much the organization is going to require from that group of people every year moving forward. And really look at the assumptions being made in this plan. This is not a throwaway. So many organizations produce a financial plan on the back of strategies that is incoherent. It's not realistic. It says we want to create a new program in 6 new communities over the course of the next 3 years, and the program expenses line only increases by 2 or 3% every year. And the revenue side only increases by 2 or 3% every year. It's incoherent. It doesn't make sense. This fights with, at the end of the process, the strategies. Because ultimately, we may get here, and we may say as a board, I don't know if we are really going to be able to do that. We maybe got to go back to our strategies and say, can we achieve that visibility, or can we achieve that programmatic goal in a less expensive way through a different type of strategy? Instead of going out and touring our orchestra into 17 communities throughout Arkansas, because reaching people throughout the entire state of Arkansas is vital to our mission. Instead of getting all of our musicians on a bus once every 3 weeks and sending them out to these 17 communities, can we accomplish some of that online? Can we send a string quartet instead of the full orchestra? Can we train a corps of teaching artists and send one teaching artist instead of the entire orchestra, and try to develop a strategy to get the schools to pay to bring the kids to us rather than us going to them? Does that make sense? Right? So the ramifications of the strategies are being borne out in this financial plan. And this is fighting with these strategies right at the last minute. And it's forcing us to be super realistic about the financial implications of our strategies, not only on the expense side, but also on the revenue side. But please, this is not a 47-hour labor. This is a general map. This is, if we say we want to create a new program, and it is vital that we expand the geographic scope of what we're doing over the course of the next year, 2 years, 3 years, roughly speaking, how much is that going to cost us? And what does that mean our board is going to have to do? What does that mean our development department is going to have to do, right? And if we're looking at our revenue side during this part of the process, and we realize that actually our revenue is going to have to increase by 20% or 30% or 40% or 50% over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, that may mean that one of our strategies has got to be, we've got to bring on a part-time development director. We've got to bring on a new grant writer. Does that make sense? And then we've got to figure out how to pay for that. So there is this very iterative conversation between financial plan and strategies. And sometimes our financial plan is going to make us change our strategy, because we get here and we're trying to produce a coherent financial plan that when we send the presses, not the full strategic plan, but the 10 or 15-page version of this plan out to every single funder in our community. When we hold a party at the home of that board member who has the most beautiful home with the nice art collection and the beautiful garden on a beautiful April afternoon, and invite the press, and invite our funders, and invite our family, invite our donors, and invite our potential donors to that home, and announce our new strategic vision, and our charismatic executive director and artistic director gets up and gets everybody really excited about this vision, so that the funder knows exactly what you will be coming and asking them for a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. And gets everybody excited, and we use this strategic plan as an institutional marketing spike in and of itself. This financial plan isn't something that the funder looks at and says, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. These people have no idea what they're talking about. They're not being realistic about what these strategies are going to cost them. And in this way, this document becomes a very logical story. Think about your strategic plan as telling a story. This flows, the mission tells us exactly what we need to study in the environment. The environment tells us exactly what we need in order to be successful. The internal analysis looks at ourselves candidly and says, we have what it takes or we don't have what it takes. The strategies tell us, what are you going to do about it? The implementation says, this is how we are going to do it, and when we are going to do it, and who is going to do it. And the financial plan simply tells us what it's going to cost. And this very simple 6-step process leads us to a document that is a living document. We will come back, we will revise this. In your implementation plan, you should be talking to yourself about how often you're going to get back together and say, let's go through that Excel spreadsheet and see whether or not we have done what we said we're going to do. And it may turn out that 3 months from now or 6 months from now, assumptions that you made in your strategies were not realistic vis-a-vis your existing capacity. And you have to go back and revise your strategies because the work isn't getting done. And maybe that's because there is a staff member or a board member who's asleep at the wheel and they need a little poke in the behind. Or it may be that that strategy was simply unrealistic and we need a new one. But this turns into an internal management document that is constantly changing, we're constantly revising, we're constantly going back to it. This turns into a real, useful management tool that is our master, keeps our board on track. We have boards that revisit this at every meeting. That the nominations committee comes in and reports on the tactics that were delegated to them in the strategic plan. And they use this as the way to structure their board meeting. We want this to tell a story internally. Very importantly, we want to use this as both a marketing and a fundraising tool externally. If you're not using your new strategic plan to raise money, you're not using your new strategic plan well enough. Funders love this stuff. They love to get the 10-page version, not the 100-page version, the 10-page version. Yes?